Okay, so hi everyone. Thanks for joining us for this very last session in the afternoon of Wednesday. And I would like to start just saying hello to everyone and introducing myself. So I'm Sara Farrona, and I'm PI at the National University of Ireland, Galway, and I'm the chair of this session. And we have, I think, a very interesting last session that we are going really to enjoy. And just before starting this session and introducing the speakers, I would like to remind you about how to post your questions. So you have this live now icon, so you can click there and then the window for the question will appear, and you can write down the questions, and I will keep them under control and just read them for the speakers today. And we have all our speakers here ready to start this session. So we have Celia Baruch, Clara Burbos, and Kalayani. And everyone joining, I think, from a different country, so very international session right now. And I would like to start with Clara, that is the first speaker for this session. So Clara Borbos is working with Freddy Barnes in Paris in events. And today she's going to talk about Histon 1 and one of my favorite topics, that is the K27 5-methyl mark and the repressive landscape in which they are involved, and how they play different roles in that landscape. So thank you very much, Clara. And I leave it with you. So whenever you want to start, please.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm very enthusiastic today to present, as part of this in-depth session, our latest work about the antagonistic role of histone H1 on the polycomb repressive landscape over genes and telomeric repeats. So histone H1 are bound to nucleosomes, and they contain a GH1 globular domain that sits here on the nucleosome dyad and a C-terminal domain that binds to the linker DNA. The Arabidopsis genome encodes 3 H1 variants, 2 of them being referred to as canonical because they are ubiquitously expressed in somatic cells. And they are also present over the whole chromosomes here, as you can see by ChIP-seq analysis. But you see that they have a more prominent enrichment over pericentromeric heterochromatin. And this is in line with the non-role of histone H1 in facilitating the compaction of chromatin. Indeed, H1 promotes the formation of dense nucleosome arrays and facilitates the formation of higher order chromatin structures. And this is visible at the cytological level. Here you have nuclei from wild type and H1 mutant plants. So it's called 2H1 because it's a double H11, H12 mutants mutated for both canonical variants. And you see here that the chromatin is really more relaxed. You don't see this dense foci in the mutant. And this is due mainly to the scattering of the pericentromeric regions in the nuclear space, as compared to the wild-type situation where it's really well compacted. But besides this role in chromatin compaction, H1 have also been shown to interplay with the chromatin landscape, and one of these crosstalk involves PRC2 activity. So it has been shown in vitro that H1 containing nucleosomes are the preferred substrate for PRC2 complex. And this could be due, so it's hypothesized that it's due to the direct interaction between H1 and the PRC2 complex. And this is quite in line with some observation we made a few years ago in collaboration with Celia Baruch's group, where we show a global reduction in the level of H3K27 trimethylation in the H1 mutant. We've seen this by Western blot here, but also by quantifying the signal by immunofluorescence. It's quantified here, and we just observed the reminiscence of some very bright foci of undetermined nature. So stemming from this observation, we then wonder how this global reduction in H3K27 trimethylation was translated along the chromosomes and at the single gene level. That's why we engage in a ChIP-seq experiment, probing for H3K27 remethylation in wild type and in H1 mutant plants. But because of this global reduction in marking that we observed by Western blot and immunofluorescence, we thought that traditional ChIP-seq won't be very suited. And we instead did ChIP-Rx. So it's a specific ChIP-seq method that involves a spike-in normalization. So basically, we introduced a small percentage of Drosophila chromatin prior to immunoprecipitation, and we used Drosophila reads to normalize to the absolute level, the level of H3K27 methyl-3. And here you have the result of the differential analysis of the marking of the mutant versus the wild type. So you have the log-fold change on the y-axis. One dot is one gene. And what we saw is for the thousands of genes that are marked in Arabidopsis, a majority of them are hypomarked in the H1 mutant, which is well in line with the global reduction of the mark we observed in the previous slide. So you have an example here of gene profile in the 3 categories, hyper, not affected, and hypomarked gene in the mutant. And what you see here in this most prominent category in green is that there is a residual marking in the H1 mutant, so it's not completely gone, but the level is way decreased compared to the wild type. And this is quite in line with two studies that were published in Nature last year in human cells, where they also made the same conclusion, where a global depletion of histone H1 leads to a global decrease of H3K27 trimethylation over genes. And besides this effect of genes, we, sorry, I just wanted to make a little digression of a possible important role that this could have during Arabidopsis development. So Celia, several years ago, have observed that there is, during sporogenesis, in specific cell types, a drastic depletion of the H1 content in these cells. So it's the megaspore mother cell and the pollen mother cells. And very interestingly, she also observed that there is a global decrease in H3K27 trimethylation in these same cells. So this could have what's happening on genes here that we show by ChIP-seq could be highly relevant during Arabidopsis development. And what I wanted to switch now is that besides this effect that I told you on genes, we also observed striking features in pericentromeric regions. So you have here a global view of chromosome 1 and chromosome 4. It's the ChIP-Rx profiles in the wild type in blue and the H1 mutant in red. And we saw two large regions that show a very outstanding levels of marking, specifically in the mutants, here and here. And because these are embedded in the pericentromere, then we wonder what more closely what's happening on transposable elements and repeats. And with our ChIP-Rx differential enrichment analysis, we spotted more than 1,000 repeats and transposable elements that were differentially enriched, and they are gaining H3K27 trimethylation in the mutant. And those repeats could be clusterized into two clusters. One cluster with a very, very high enrichment in the H1 mutant, and the cluster 2 with a more mild enrichment in the mutant. And taking a closer look at these elements, we noticed very easily here that the cluster 1 repeats are almost all in the two regions I spotted in the previous slide in the pericentromere of chromosome 1 and 4, while the cluster 2 elements are more scattered along the pericentromeres of all chromosomes. And we performed a de novo motif search in these cluster 1 elements and found thousands of these motifs, which are the telomeric repeat motifs, so-called telobox. And also, the majority of the elements in this cluster 1 are in the family of AT repeating, which are actually already described as being telomeric elements. And indeed, these regions here with that contain the cluster 1 elements that I spotted in the pericentromeres of chromosome 1 and 4 have been already described to be interstitial telomeric repeats. So it's several KB regions that have outstanding levels in the H1 mutant of H3K27 trimethylation. So we can conclude from this that H1 prevents PRC2 activity in these regions, in these interstitial telomeres. So because of this, we wonder if what's happening on real telomeres. And so that's the result of a chip dot blot analysis that was performed in collaboration with Jiri Fashkus lab. And indeed, what we saw is a global approximately fourfold enrichment of this mark in telomeres in the mutant versus the wild type. And this was actually confirmed by another technique by looking at the colocalization of DNA fish signals for telomere and immunofluorescence of H3K27 trimethylation. And you see here, so it's quantification in several nuclei, that there is more colocalization in the mutant than in the wild type. So it means that H1 also prevents H3K27 trimethylation in bona fide telomeres. So because telomeres and H3K27 methyl-3 are such prominent features that determine 3D genome organization, and because we've seen in the introduction that the nuclear organization in the H1 mutant is affected in terms of chromocenter and pericentromeric regions compaction. Sorry, I missed a little very interesting part. So the first thing I wanted to tell you before switching to the 3D genome organization is that H1 protein are part of a bigger protein family of GH1 domain containing proteins. And this family contains 5 members, which are telomeric binding proteins. And interestingly, these TRB proteins have been shown in the group of Francis Katurk to be able to bind to telobox motif in the promoter of genes and to directly interact with PRC2 and to direct H3K27 trimethylation in genes that have a telobox in their promoter. And so we hypothesize that maybe that was what's happening on ITRs in the absence of histone H1. So to test this hypothesis, we perform the TRB1 ChIP-seq in the H1 mutant and in the wild type. And here you have the profile of the result of this ChIP-seq analysis. And you see here the ITR interstitial telomere of chromosome 1 with the gain of K27 trimethyl. And you see this huge gain of TRB1, which is, you see here in the magnification around the ITR region. So there is no TRB1 in the wild type, but as soon as H1 is depleted, TRB1 is able to bind to these interstitial telomeres and correlate with K27 trimethylation marking. So we can conclude that H1 exclude GH1 containing TRB1 protein. So maybe there is a competition over this telobox motif in the interstitial telomeres, which prevents PRC2 activity in this region. So now coming back to the 3D genome organization that we wanted to understand more in depth, we performed Hi-C analysis of the wild type and the 2H1 mutant. So I will just tell you 2 conclusions from this Hi-C analysis. So the first one is highlighted here. So when you have the red color, it means we have more interaction in the mutant compared to the wild type. And when it's blue, it means we have less interaction in the mutant. And the first thing we spotted is that you have this blue color here in these pericentromeric regions. Here it's highlighted just from chromosome 1, but it's true for all chromosomes, which really correspond to the decompaction of pericentromeres. So there is less interaction overall in the H1 mutant. So this corresponds to the cytological observation. But what's very striking is if you see here this little red triangle just underneath the ITR regions, which is magnified here, meaning that this ITR stays very compacted in the mutant, even if the surrounding regions of pericentromeres get more relaxed in the mutant. And the second observation we made is that looking at subtelomeric regions and the ITR regions, we could discover that there is more interaction overall in the mutant in between telomeres and in between ITRs and telomeres. And this was confirmed by a cytological approach. So this was performed by Simon Amiard in the group of Aline Probst, where Simon saw by DNA fish, again with the telomeric probes, that there is overall a smaller number of foci into H1 mutant nuclei, which indicates that H1 promotes telomere individualization. And the second observation he made is that these fish foci were less often localized towards the nucleolus in the mutant as compared to the wild type. So meaning that H1 promotes the convergence of telomeres towards the nucleus. So I will just finish with this little graphical take-home message and acknowledging all these people that contributed to this study, and in particular Freddy Barnesch, who co-directed this work, and Gianluca Teano, who this study was part of his PhD thesis. So thank you, and I will take any question now.
So thanks a lot, Clara, for a very nice, interesting talk. So I'm just having a look at the question line to see if there are questions coming. It seems that there are not right now any questions. I guess that they will get a few seconds to write them down. So I just wanted to start saying that your data fits quite well with the, and maybe bringing that to evolution again, to the idea that that the K27 mark was initially a repressive mark, a heterochromatic repressive mark, and then through evolution, it moves from the pure heterochromatin to the facultative heterochromatin, or the constitutive heterochromatin to the facultative heterochromatin, and that probably H1 has been one of the elements that help to this spreading of K27. So really, really interesting. I was wondering, I mean, that is very clear at the heterochromatic region when you lose the H1, I mean, the H1 mutant background. But what happens, because H1 is a bit everywhere, no, in the chromatin, it's not just only there.
So it's really enriched in a heterochromatin, but it's also present in repressed genes, especially polycomb repressed genes, and also towards the end of expressed genes. But okay, it's usually associated with transcriptional repression, yes.
Yeah, so that particular antagonistic role that H1 has with PRC2 or polycomb in the heterochromatin, I mean the centromeric or in the telomeres region, it might be no antagonistic anymore in other parts of the genome, or I'm understanding this wrong?
So we think there is really two different things happening on genes or telomeric repeats. So on telomeric repeats or the ITRs that are embedded in pericentromers, but it's very different from the surrounding transposable elements. It's really the ITR regions. There is a competition, we think, with TRB1. So that's what is supported by the TRB1 chipset data. So there is really this antagonistic mechanism between these different GH1 domain containing protein, which would compete for the binding the same DNA motif. But on genes, it's the mechanism is not so clear because the effect is the opposite. When you lose H1, you lose polycomb activity. Yeah. And the work in the Nature papers I was mentioning about, they propose that the compacting effect of H1 on chromatin promotes polycomb activity because polycomb preferred a more dense nucleosome arrays as a substrate.
Okay, interesting. I have a question now for you from Eva Mozgova. So, will the genes with increased K27 3-methylation mark be the ones with telobox?
Yes, exactly. So I did not mention it because of lack of time. There is a few hundred genes that gain K27, and many of them are actually hypothetical genes or TEs, and for some of them, we indeed see teloboxes motifs, yes, in the promoter. So that's why they would behave more like the ITRs than the true polycomb target genes.
Really interesting. Okay, another question from Christophe Tatou. Is there any known function related to the ITR regions? Is there any activity of the ATR P18, I don't know if I'm reading this well, retrotransposons, if I understood well, in the H1 mutant background.
So not all species across the different kingdoms, animals or anything, not all species have ITRs. In the plant kingdoms, it's not so well described neither. So it's more, so Girifascus would know way more about this topic than me. But from what I understood, it could be ancient, either chromosomal fusion or improper homologous recombination. And so I'm not sure there is really a true role for ITRs, but this is a big question.
Okay, so I think that we need to stop here because we need to move now to the new talk by Kalyani. But thanks a lot for a very nice topic and very nice talk.